Howdy, howdy, Sudevil here, and welcome to my video review of the Vampire Coast Dwarf matchup, where we're going to go over some of the key units you have to watch out for as the Dowie. The Lords I think you'll expect to see as a main meta pick if you do see it. Some Dowie builds that I've tested, and finally a tournament legal Dowie build that I've concocted that I think, you know, you never want to say this for sure, but it might actually be unbeatable. I mean, I don't know. It seems really, really strong, especially with some of the testing that I've done. You know, you put any Vampire Coast build up against it with equal level players, I think it's going to be pretty tough to beat. I could be wrong, though, but it feels very, very strong, and we're going to review that at the very end. Now, I will also review a specific build by Turin that's meant for the Vampire Coast against the Dowie, which I think makes use of some of the things we're going to see, but we will go through all of that. I think first I'm just going to go through the key units I think you have to be prepared for as the Dowie, and we're going to start with their Lords. Now, it's kind of odd in that the Vampire Coast only have one Lord that's optimal against the Dowie out of all of these. There's only one, and that's actually the Vampire Fleet Admiral with a pistol of vampires, and that is because I'll go over the reasons. Araness Assault Spite is anti-large. She doesn't have a whole lot of armor. She's gonna have some things she can do against the Dowie, but you know, generally the Dowie don't have a lot of large. Luther Harkon, it's good Lord, but he has this, when he hits you with his melee attack or his pistol, it gives you 50% miscast chance and disrupts you. Dowie don't have magic, you know, and Luther Harkon doesn't have armor piercing. Well, he does have armor piercing, also damage, but he doesn't have magic, so he's sort of a suboptimal Lord. Salastra Direfin, which I theory crafted before this was released, would be the best Lord against the Dowie. She's still pretty good against the Dowie because the Dowie have no answers to her specifically. She does have magical attacks, and she has no healing, so that's a bit of a struggle, but she does have a few spells that are really valuable in that she has two major summons, one of the Damned Knights and one of the Rotting Prometheans, which are armor piercing large. I mean, they're a pretty good summon. And then we have Noctilus, who is also an anti-large hero. Now, Noctilus is actually very good. I've seen him. I've fought against Noctilus, and I fought against haven't fought against Silastra except for in some testing, and I fought against this Vampire Fleet Admiral. I don't know if I fought Luther Harkon or Araness. I don't think I fought either, but really, Noctilus is actually quite good because he does have the summons. He has the Moon Dial for he basically ends up having 6 summons. So he's actually really good. He's tanky. He can fight, has good armor, and he's decent on the ground. And you can put him on his mount, you know, and he'll be pretty good. Silastra is again, you can put her on her mount, but then you have Large, which is going to be perfect for Slayers. Really, I think the optimal Lord against the Dowie has to be the Vampire Fleet Admiral with pistol, because she can sit back and shoot. She has 90 range, armor piercing, and she, you know, just with the basic abilities, she has a Curse of Undeath, which resurrects dead. Every time she casts, resurrects map wide dead combatants and heals, and has Hornswoggle, like basically every 90 seconds, all battle long, basically every 2 minutes for the whole battle, she can cast it on an enemy 100 meters away, minus 27 melee defense, minus 30 armor, which is perfect. And the spells, I mean, just the summons, Drown Dead, 4 summons of zombies, and you can overcast that for zombies with guns, and Invocation of the Heck. And for the items, just the Black Parapt, which increases your power reserves. You get a really solid Lord against the Dowie, and she's also very cheap at 1,600 gold. So I think this is the unit you have to be prepared for over any other. And she can be put on this Rotting Promethean mount, which gives her more hit points and does make her have armor piercing in melee, and you know you would actually then probably give her the Hunger. She'd come in at about 2,000, but just in this level at 1623, I think that's the optimal unit you have to be prepared for. And these other ones you will see. Like Count Noctilus is good, and I do think Silastra has her place, especially if she buffs Queen Bess, which is pretty amazing from what I've seen. Now, as far as heroes, really, you may see, if you do see Silastra, some people will bring a vampire fleet captain of vampires, and same with Luther Harkon, but really it is the Morgul Haunter who is completely awesome. Anti-infantry, fear and terror, has stock, can get really close, armor piercing. You know, with this 25 bonus versus infantry, has 75 melee attack against infantry, which is perfect against the Dawi, and regenerates, I think, or has a hunger, so replenishes hit points as it attacks, causes fear and terror. This is a unit you're going to see. Dawi do have answers, so Slayers are amazing against these guys, and so are just basic Quarrelers or Rangers, because, yeah, he has 30 missile resistance, but he only has 50 armor, and he's really big. Like, he is surprisingly big, but this is something you'll see on a regular basis is going to be good against the Dawi. Really, the Gunnery White you will see periodically if they're going to be buffing Queen Bess or something else like that, but it's not really a character you have to prepare for, per se. Really, the one you have to be ready for, the Morgul Haunter, and I think the Vampire Fleet Admiral with all the summons. As far as the infantry, you're going to see Zombie Pirate Deckhand mobs or Zombie Pirate Deckhand mobs with polearms. Now, the polearm variant is an anti-large, but it does have anti-armor, or it does have armor piercing. You know, 14 melee attack versus this guy has 17 melee attack with no armor piercing. I don't know. I did some testing, and I think the Zombie Pirate Deckhand mobs, just the basic one, is the preferable unit to the one with polearms, because even though it does armor piercing, it's an extra 100 gold, which is actually a lot. And particularly with Zombie Pirate Deckhand mobs, they're not there to fight the Dawi front line. Every single dwarf unit will trash both of these. They're really to just muck up Dawi units and get their big guns or their other units fighting. So I think really the optimal pick here against the Dawi is the Zombie Pirate Deckhand mobs at 300. Put 5 of those on the field just to muck things up and allow for your other bigger troops to go. But lots of people do use the pole arms because of the armor piercing, even though that anti-large of, I think, 13, yeah, it's a pretty good bonus, goes to waste. All right, next, the Depth Guard. Now, I think this is the one unit they just really do good against Slayers. They do good against base Dawi infantry, but they are vulnerable because they don't have a shield, though they do have 90 armor. I think you're going to see a lot of Depth Guard in general against the Dawi. They're very good. They only have 45 models, though, and you can deal with them. So they're really their strongest infantry. You know, with five Zombie Pirate Deckhands on the front line and 3 Depth Guard behind, I think that's a really strong front line. Now, the other units that you're going to see are obviously Zombie Pirate Gunnery Mob with handguns. They are armor piercing, and they have 145 range. They're sort of like Thunders, and you are going to see these guys. They should be a staple in this matchup because they're very strong. Plus, for their first 20% of their ammo, they have an extra 30% damage, essentially. Really strong unit, I think, and a unit that I expect to see everything, because they're only 550 gold. They're super cheap for what they can do. Now, you will see also deck gunners. Now, in the last fight I had with the Vampire Coast, there was 3 units deck gunners, and they should be really good against the Dawi because they have this ability here, Shield Breaker. When they hit a unit, it gives them minus 24 missile parry with the shields. Essentially, it negates the Dawi shield, which should make them very vulnerable. Now, if this is their only unit, it's not really that much to be feared. But really, one of these in conjunction, one or two of these in conjunction with 3 to 5 of the Zombie Pirate Gunnery mobs could be pretty devastating. Although by themselves, they really don't have a whole lot of damage per second, really DPS. They will whittle you down, but their DPS is not very high. It is these Zombie Pirate Gunnery mobs that are scary. They can do a ton of damage really fast. All right. The other units, which are really kind of classic vampire units, which you will see depending on the build, is going to be scurvy dogs and fellbats. And really, they're just fast flanking units, something that'll get in the back, something to muck up Dowie, quarrelers and rangers and this sort of thing in the back line. You may see them, you may not see them. I think probably there's, scurvy dogs. I mean, fellbats are just, they never ever worry me, and I don't think they ever pay for themselves against the Dowie. Maybe they do, but the scurvy dogs certainly can. If they get a rear charge and they get out right away, they can kill a lot of rangers really, really fast. And they're super fast, but they're both okay. I mean, you're going to see them periodically. Now, one of the units which I think is should be a staple in this matchup is the basic Morgul. They're fantastic anti-infantry. They're fear and terror. They have stock, so they can get very close. Their bonus versus infantry is 20, so they have 58 melee attack when they're attacking Dowie. They can regenerate with that hunger. They cause fear and terror. They're just like a solid unit. Now, whether you use depth guard in your back line, you might have one depth guard, 2 Morguls, or, I don't know. Really, essentially, depth guard and Morguls are where the Vampire Coast can get their heavy damage against Dowie, along with this Morgul Haunter. Unless they decide to go ranged, which I think is a mistake against the Dowie, but the only thing they have really unranged that's really strong is that Queen Bess, but we'll talk about that in a sec. Morguls are very strong, but they're vulnerable. They do have 30% missile resist, but they only have 40 armor. Slayers are amazing against this. Just the base Slayer, don't need anything special. They're amazing. And even Quarrelers are really strong against Morguls. The Regiment of Renown is really good too. I think it has, what does it have special about it? There was something else it had which is pretty amazing. Vanguard, I don't remember. Maybe there isn't. Okay, so just the basic Morgul and the depth guard, that's the heavy hitters you're going to see for the infantry. Otherwise, you're going to see a pretty ranged contingent. Second to last is the deck droppers. I think you need to be ready for them. They do have 130 range. They are very mobile with 90 speed, and they have armor piercing. So they get behind you or focus down your lord. They can be pretty devastating. Really, Dowie, Quarrelers, and Rangers are the hard counter because they outrange these guys and they just destroy them. They only have 15 armor. They have no resistance. They only have 18 units. I mean, they have quite a bit of health for their units, and they are anti-infantry, it says. I don't see any true infantry bonus, but it says they're anti-infantry, which is a little weird. Anyways, these guys are not as scary against your units. Where they are really scary is if you did bring they could do whittle down heroes like really fast, like even worse than some units that are typically annoying, like the skinks on the pterodons. Skink chiefs on a pterodon can be very annoying against a hero. These guys can be devastating against a hero. They get on your hero and they can crush him, but they just can't overcome. I think this if you see these in the match, be happy, really, because they just can't overcome Dowie Quarrelers unless they get a lot of summons or something like that. They're just they are very vulnerable up in the air. And last but not least of units I think you need to be prepared for in your builds is Queen Bess. Now, did a lot of testing on Queen Bess, and Queen Bess is amazing. Armor piercing, massive 450 range, huge arc of fire, anti-infantry, flaming damage. Queen Bess is incredible, is really a fantastic piece of artillery, but it is also 1600 and there is only one. The best way to prepare for artillery like this is to go wide, not to have anything real expensive. And, with Queen Bess, Siloster Direfin, and a Gunnery White, Queen Bess can easily get 300 kills against a Dowie. It's unbelievable. I'll show some of the testing that I think it was me and J-Beck did, like 8 or 9 battles, Dowie versus Vampire Coast, which were really fun. But we were really testing a lot of things, and I'm testing Queen Bess specifically against one of my builds. Now, these are the units to work to, I think you have to be prepared for. And really, when it comes to Morongols, the Morgul Haunter, Morongols, and pretty much everything else that's on the ground, Slayers do the job just fine, and so do basic Dwarf Warriors. But anyways, I'll go and look. We're gonna go over and look over at 3 Dowie builds and whatnot. They're just, there just is not anything else that is real serious in here. I mean, you can bring a Rotting Leviathan. Death Shriek Terrorgeist could be a little scary because, it does cause terror. It has regeneration and poison attacks. It can, it could be a little scary, but it only has 80 armor, and it has very low leadership. But I mean, as a mount, the Rotting Leviathan, I mean, it's huge and easy to hit. That's the problem with all these big things against the Dowie. They're very easy to hit with anything. You might see some Carronades. I think they can be very strong in this matchup, and this is why I'm not going to recommend bringing artillery, because Queen Bess and 2 Carronades could go to town on Dowie artillery, because they have 30% extra damage, and if they have a gunnery wight giving them 60%, because the gunnery wight can actually give 60% accuracy plus extra reload. 2 Carronades and Queen Bess, or 3 Carronades, could definitely devastate Dowie artillery. So pretty scary to bring it. But anyways, yeah, this is really the army to be most scared of, I think, or these are some of the units. And I'll pull up Turin's build, which is really good. Vampire Coast Turin build. Okay, there we go. And this is the build that Turin put together in his setup, which is obviously a strong build because Turin is very good at Vampire Coast, and he has made a guide, I think, or is going to make a guide for Vampire Coast against every faction, and he also knows the Dowie inside and out, having played the Dowie a lot. So he actually picked Luther Harkon, which is I think an interesting pick, but I think it's mainly for the missile damage, and he can fire while he's moving, and he's a duelist. Just with the hunger to replenish his hit points, Hornswoggle to lower armor, and All Hands Hoy to improve leadership, and not the Slan Gold, obviously, because it just doesn't have any effect, but it's really cheap, 1562, and then he brought a Vampire Fleet Captain with vampires, which I think, obviously, you just want, all you want for the spells are, and that's all he has, is Invocation of Nehek and the Drowned Dead, and doesn't even have the item, and then Morgul Haunter at the base level with none of the abilities, because you just don't need them. I mean, this Potion of Strength could actually be really good, and I think you could argue that Deadly Onslaught and the Potion of Strength with this guy would be worth it to bring, but that's basically the leadership set, the lore of vampires and the Morgul Haunter, and he wants Luther Harkon, I think, for the missile damage and the ability to fire while on the move to pick apart units, whereas I think the stronger pick ultimately is. I think the strongest pick ultimately is a Vampire Fleet Admiral, because then you just have your magic and your damage all in one, and you can pick 2 Morgul Haunters if you really like. But then the front line, and this is exactly sort of what I was talking about. Front line is Zombie Pirate Deckhand Mobs with Polearms for the armor piercing, followed up by 2 depth cards. So those are the heavy hitters in his build, really to come up against the Dowie line, get the Dowie line mucked up with these guys, and then support with the depth guard behind. And for his range contingent, has 2 deck gunners. Now these deck gunners, again, they don't do a whole lot of damage, but if you do combine these deck gunners with the deck droppers, could be really devastating. And then he does have 1 Fellbat and 2 Scurvy Dogs in this build to get to the Dowie backline, and deck droppers with handguns to, I think this is all meant to be focus fire, the deck gunners and all these guys like that. So that's sort of the build that Turns put out there for against the Dowie. I haven't seen too many other builds that are specifically out there by strong players put up against the Dowie yet. But if there is other ones, maybe I'll obviously take a look at it. Now we're going to look at the Dwarf builds, and I'm going to start with the build that I sort of theory crafted before the launch, before even the tournament. Really, as soon as I saw the units listed, I theory crafted a build and saved it, and this is the build that I theory crafted. Used it a few times and tested it, and if you see my channel, you've seen this build in action. It's very, very strong, although it's not tournament legal. I have 6 Bugman's Rangers. You can only have 5, and I'll go over the last tournament legal build, which is a really fun build. I think it's really cool. Anyways, the whole idea was that because it's an undead faction, I wanted to have all units with immune to psychology, so they wouldn't be worried about fear and terror. So we have Longbeards, which we know are good in a lot of matchups. We have Bugman's Rangers, immune to fear and terror. We have the Grumbling Guard, which is immune to psychology. And these units, all the Longbeards encourage. And then we have the Drangback Slayers, which are unbreakable. And finally, for the leadership is the Rune Lord. And his abilities are Master Rune of Wrath and Rune, and the Rune of Negation at 44% damage resistance, and none of the abilities. And we have the Runesmith with Rune of Wrath and Rune, and we have the Hammer of Carrick Draws, which is amazing, and the Master Rune of Groth One Eye for the +8 leadership. So really, the idea is that this, with the leadership and these units, would be fundamentally every unit except the leaders are immune to psychology, so that +8. That's why I put in that +8 leadership, so you can keep those two together, and they can encourage each other, and it'll keep the leadership. The whole idea is this army will fight to the bitter end, and it worked. You know, I have a few videos of this army fighting, and it's very effective and very strong. And even though, I mean, I've played poorly in a few games, and it still did very good. And it's an army that can punch above its weight, but it's not optimal. So the next army that I set up is, I thought, well, I don't really need the Runes of Wrath and Rune. They are strong against Depth Guard, but if there is no Depth Guard, there's really nothing to use it against. So this is why I changed, and I looked at the lords. Really, Thorgrim Grudgebearer and Belegar Ironhammer are the 2 lords I looked at, but I like Belegar Ironhammer just because you can bring him so cheaply, and he was reduced in price in this update from 1150 base to 1100, but he's got that silver shield, which is going to defend against, deck gunners, going to defend against deck droppers if they try and focus him down. He's got very good stats at 60 melee attack and 55 melee defense, and he's just, charge defense against all. He's just good all around, and an easy sort of unit to bring. And as I had put my build together, I thought, really, I didn't actually need those Longbeards, because I tested it, and the Dwarf Warriors are good enough. So really, next build I brought with 5 Dwarf Warriors, because Dwarf Warriors can handle zombie pirate deckhands, can handle scurvy dogs, can handle a lot of this stuff. The only thing they can't handle are Depth Guard. So I thought, well, I'll put that together with 5 Dwarf Warriors, because we'll see if they're going to do okay in that fight, and they do very good. And I thought, well, I would do the same thing with Rangers. So we just got very cheap 5 Rangers like that, and just to put the pressure on any deck droppers or any units that they can. And then finally, I wanted the Slayer, so I put in the rest of 7 Slayers total with the Dragonback Slayers. And now I have 2 games up with this build showing, and it was really reasonable, and I think did okay. But there are no answers to Depth Guard at all in this build. I just wanted to run a build like this to test how it would run, and I think the base Slayer were fundamentally really, really strong in this matchup. And the last fight I posted up, there was 3 Depth Guard. There was these deck gunners, and they had not the zombie pirate deckhand mobs, but with the polearms, just the base one. They had the deck droppers and Luther Harkon or Count Noctilus. I think it was generally a pretty good build, and this build just ate it up without much of a struggle. I mean, I didn't play amazingly, but this build is really, really strong. So in looking, I think that I like this Ranger build, and the Dwarf Warriors and the Slayers, and I wanted to make a tournament legal build, so this is the tournament legal build that I made. So we go down to Vampire Coast, and there we go. So I think this takes the best of all worlds, and it does account for Depth Guard. So I have the maximum allowed Slayers, so 5 Slayers, just base Slayers are all you need in this matchup. 5 Rangers, that's all you need in this matchup again. 4 Dwarf Warriors, Belagar Ironhammer, and 5 Dwarf Warriors with great weapons. Now, Dwarf Warriors with great weapons aren't amazing in an infantry fight, but they're armor piercing, and they can sort of do a reasonable job. So if I were to face an army that had, depth guard, whether it was 2 or 3, this is enough armor piercing to deal with it. And this is, you got to think, this is 2,500 gold of armor piercing units, and right here is 2,400 gold with 2. So and they can match up pretty well. And then you have a front line where your Dwarf Warriors really are going to match up against Zombie Pirate Deckhand mobs, either the polearm or non-polearm variant, and they can chase down all kinds of other things. And finally, if you do get some crazy build where they bring 2 Mongol Haunters and like 4 Mongols, then you do have the 5 Slayers. And Slayers are just strong in this matchup. When I look at everything in here, I think Belagar Ironhammer's strong in this matchup. He has no abilities, just a base ability. And this is the army that I'm going to recommend for anyone to play to as a base army or a base package to play against the Vampire Coast. And it turns out, I think I just, aside from anything, I really like it because it is visually satisfying that there's 5, 5, 5, and 4 and 1, so that they actually show up really nicely on the screen, and they have 0 gold remaining, and there are no regiments of renown. So I think it's sort of a very satisfying base Dowie package. Now, this is not to say, don't. Like, you can play a lot of builds because the Dowie have a strong advantage in this matchup. The reason I'm recommending this build is because it's very, very simple and very straightforward and pretty easy. And I think you can come back if you make some mistakes with this build. The beauty of it is it is tournament legal, and also it is a type of build that if you want to say you really want artillery, you can go and look at starting with this base build and deciding, well, I'm only going to have 3 Rangers and 3 of these guys, and I'm going to take away 2 Slayers, and now I've got 3,800 for artillery, and maybe I'm going to want, kind of a bunch of cannons, something like that, and I don't know what I'm going to go at from there. But the idea being that you start with this really basic build, and I would just recommend playing with it as is. I think this is incredibly strong, and hopefully I'll get some ladder games where I get to use it, because the nice part about it is that Queen Bess, someone brings Queen Bess can be quite devastating. Using Queen Bess, what do you target here? What exactly do you target? You target Slayers. Slayers are not a great target for Queen Bess because they're so spread apart. Whatever you target, you can't see the Rangers, so I guess you target the Dwarf Warriors. They're only 500, and so they're not going to be that good. And you can't target Belagar because it's not going to help you. So, and if they bring artillery, there are no good targets here for artillery. Now, you bring a depth guard. Well, there are some Dwarf Warriors with great weapons. This isn't the greatest lineup. It'd be really what you need against depth guard, which is really strong as hammers. But I don't think it'd be a good idea to bring hammers in this build, just because they'd be too easy to focus. And you bring your front line of deckhands or whatever you bring. Just base Dwarf Warriors are good enough. They're shielded. They can go up there and fight. And no matter what you bring, there's an answer. You have Scurvy Dogs and Fellbats. Well, they come across Slayers or even Dwarf Warriors with great weapons. They'll do just fine against those units. So I think in the end, this build is very strong. The only other lord I would like to develop a build for, or see a build, if you have one and you've used a build with Thorgrim, I'd love to see it, because I think Thorgrim could be very good in this matchup. And just because he is great anti-infantry, and he has some very nice abilities with the Oath of Vengeance, and you know, High King might be useful. You know, you could actually bring him relatively cheap and not even worry about the Great Book of Grudges, you know, and just bring High King and cast Oath of Vengeance as many times as you can. Bring him at 1831. You know, really, you only have to erase one Slayer to kind of get him in there. And, you know, if you really want to, you can bring Stand Your Ground, or you could try and bring Great Book of Grudges. But Stand Your Ground might be the right thing to bring, so he's just a little bit harder to kill. But because he's large, units like the Morgul Haunter that has anti-infantry are going to do much more poorly against him. And if he does come across anything like a Silostra and her Damn Knight summon, or, you know, Sirens, if anyone ever brought them or anything like that, he does do magic damage. You know, so I think Thorgrim Grudgebearer is a possibility, but right now, you know, it seems like Belegar is just a very, very strong number one. You know, you could mess with other lords, you know, but I just think that Grombrindle is just okay in this matchup. Ungrim Iron Fist, they can bring builds with no large. That's the very last fight that I aired on my channel, that the guy I fought against had 0 large. And the Rune Lord is always going to be a good pick, but just really not needed. I think having a strong lord like Belegar is essentially anti-infantry. He and Thorgrim do the most damage against infantry, because together I think they can hit 8 targets simultaneously, which is the most. I think the least is probably Ungrim. I think he can hit 5 simultaneously. I can't remember exactly what the numbers are, but Belegar is good anti-infantry. So for clearing out trash, even though he doesn't have armor piercing, he kills models when he's clearing out trash, and he can get the job done against a lot of that trash and clear it out relatively quickly, faster than a Rune Lord or anyone else except for Thorgrim. So, and you know, he's got that silver shield. It's going to be hard to focus down if someone decides, hey, they want to get these deck gunners and these deck droppers on him. He has that silver shield, you know, 55%, is it? Yeah, 55% of all small arms, so he can get the job done, and he's hard to hit. And, you know, having... The thing I was worried about originally, because they are an undead faction, was the Feared Terror. But the Dowie leadership, I mean, 70 leadership with your base dwarf warriors is enough. Your rangers, I think, can be terrified away, because they only have 62 leadership. So, but the thing is, how are they going to get in this build, how they are going to get Morgul Haunters or Morguls into your backline with 5 groups of Slayers? Like, what army do you want to bring as a Vampire Coast against this? I mean, I can't think of one. I know that the base dwarf package that I brought and when I theory crafted early with all the Longbeards was very strong, and the group with 7 groups of Slayers was very strong, and just the dwarf warriors, you know. But I look at this like, what do you want when you're playing the Vampire Coast? You know, what do you want to bring against this? I mean, I don't even know. You look at this crap, like it's like this is going to be really difficult to crack with anything. I mean, it ticks a lot of boxes. A, it's tournament legal. B, you fill out all 20 slots. C, you don't have a lot of good targets for artillery, as in none. There are no good targets for artillery. You know, maybe you try and gun down Belegar, but you know, the Slayers are very spread out, so they're actually the Dowie's best infantry against artillery because they're so spread out. You know, I don't know what you bring against this, to be honest. That's why I said maybe it's unbeatable in an even a level matchup where you're playing equally skilled players against each other. I don't know. I could be wrong, but I did some testing with this build, you know, AI versus AI, because sometimes I just back check those, and boy, any build I put this thing up against, they just crush. And I know it's AI versus AI, but it actually, when you do that, when you test lots of builds, because you can test them really fast, because you test them all in fast forward, it can give you some sense of how the armies match up. And I'm going to be doing a video on that I don't know when I'll get around to that video, but at some point I'm going to do that. So yeah, really, in summary, this is Turn's build. I think it's a strong build. Obviously, the guy knows how to play multiplayer. Really, when I look at the optimizing the build, I think bringing in that Vampire Fleet Admiral. Yeah, because you look at all, like, it's funny that this is the only Lord that you should bring, because you look at Aranus Spout Spite, Anti-Large, Luther Harkon has got this wasted ability of disrupting, and Silostrid Direfin, no armor piercing and magical damage, is even worse. The Vampire Fleet Admiral with a polearm is got armor piercing but is anti-large, and the other Lords of Magic just aren't as good as vampires, I think. So really, it's I think that's a pretty good example of, yeah, you don't need the hunger. Hornswoggle is really good. Yeah, but I mean, you can bring her so cheap too, I think is the thing. When you look at 1483, and you know, if you don't want to bring all hands Hoy or Hornswoggle, like, Hornswoggle is just really good. Minus 30 armor against a Dowie. I think you have to bring that, don't you? And you could cast it 20 times in a battle if you really wanted to. Well, 20 times, 10 times. But she's really good. And Morgul Haunter is good in this fight. But you know, as I've said, really, I said this right as they released all their units, I think the Dowie are going to have a really big advantage in this matchup, and I still think that. I have not seen a Vampire Coast build that is really a strong anti-Dowie build. You know, there are scary chaos builds against the Dowie. You know, like crushing builds to go against. The most difficult build I've ever faced as the Dowie is it was against the Dark Elves, which is fundamentally impossible. I don't think I could beat that build with anything. I don't even want to say it. It's so cancerous and so irritating how strong the strongest build is. I think I've said it once before, but there's a Dark Elf build that I don't think is beatable. You know, it's one of those. I don't think I could make a Dowie army that would beat it, because it is so crushing against the Dowie. And you know, this is one of those things. I don't know that there is a Vampire Coast build that beats this when you have two equal players that are putting together armies. I mean, even if you know this is coming, like, that's the part of the problem when you match up. You don't know what your opponent's going to bring. Is the Dowie going to bring 3 pieces of artillery? Are they going to bring, you know, a whole bunch of Longbeards? Are they going to bring hammers? Are they going to bring, like, most people will expect miners with blasting charges, because they would expect, well, miners with blasting charges should be amazing in this. And they will be pretty good, because they can knock down zombie pirate duckhand mobs. But Dwarf Warriors are more cost efficient. They just absolutely eat zombie pirate deckhands up, and they hardly lose any models. I mean, they're just so strong, and they're only 50 more. You know, yeah. So, anyways, would definitely love to hear from you in the comments. For those of you that have played the Vampire Coast against the Dowie, or have played the Dowie against the Vampire Coast, I would love to hear your thoughts on the builds that I've presented. Specifically, this final build. I haven't done any battles with the build. This is really what I've honed down to, a tournament legal build that I think is incredibly strong. And am I overstating this? That this build is unbeatable? I mean, I don't know. It just feels like it. Like, I think the Dowie have such a strong advantage already over the Vampire Coast. Like, this build would be I don't know what build beats this. I really don't. When you have two equally matched players, I think it'd be incredibly difficult. So I would love to hear your thoughts. If you have some ideas on builds that could do very well against this, I would be quite interested to see that, and maybe even to get online to play some matches and whatnot. I think it would be really fun. And you know, if you have some builds which you've been using, you know, now we're a little bit further into the patch, if you have builds that you've really enjoyed playing the Dowie with against the Vampire Coast, I would love to hear from you in the comments, and I would love it if you could send me a replay. I think that would be really fantastic. So anyways, no matter what happens, I would love to hear from you. I love comments. I always say that because I really do love them. This will be my first video of 2019, and I hope you find it interesting, and I hope to hear from you in the comments, and I will see you soon.